Welcome to the Occult London podcast. This is a new podcast dedicated to exploring magic, mysticism, the Kabbalah, as well as other topics. If you like the podcast, please write a review and rate us on iTunes or whatever platform you are listening to this on, as it will really help us to get this message out there. Also, be sure to check out the website at occultlondon.co.uk, where you can subscribe to the show. I hope you enjoy it. In today's episode, we will be continuing our discussion on some of the lesser known archangels. So previously, if you haven't heard those episodes, we went through all of the different archangels of the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, and now we are going through some of the lesser known ones that are still very important in certain magical and also other traditions. And today's episode, we will be talking about the Archangel Oriphiel. Oriphiel is a very important archangel in the magical tradition, however does not have many mentions from a sort of biblical perspective, other than first being mentioned by Pope Gregory I, who lived between 590 and 604, who placed him on the list of the seven primary archangels, which included Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel, Samael, and Zachariel. Oriphiel is associated with the planet Saturn and the influences of Saturn. So in a sense, he can be seen as almost a co-angel of the Sephiroth of Bina, alongside the Archangel Safkiel, who we did an episode on. Oriphiel is the Prince of the Order of the Thrones and is also meant to be the closest to God and a master of divine science, theology, metaphysics, writing, prophecy, astrology, as well as anything really connected with memory, such as archives, databases, libraries, etc. So anything connected with memory, recording, is very much in his realm of power. And Oriphiel is also meant to be one of the Lords of Karma who record all things. So similar to Zafkiel, Oriphiel is meant to see all things that are happening, have happened, and will happen in the future, and also continually monitors and records everything from the events perspective, looking at what's happened and what is the potential evolution of an event or an action or a deed. Oriphiel is mentioned, as I said, he's not really mentioned much in some of the sort of more biblical traditional texts that we see most of the archangels mentioned in. However, he is very important in a sort of magical grimoire perspective, and is mentioned in multiple grimoires over the years. And I'll go into some of these in a bit more detail. So the Sworn Book of Honorius, or the Liber Juratus, which is a 13th century medieval grimoire in the Solomonic tradition. This was meant to have been written by a magician called Honorius of Thebes. He talks about Oriphiel as being the second archangel of Saturn after Zafkiel, who's the archangel of Bina. Oriphiel is also mentioned by Cornelius Agrippa, who was a very famous occultist, scholar and scientist who lived in the 15th century and famously wrote the third book of occult philosophy. And these books deal with different aspects of magic. So there's 3 books in total, and you have elemental, celestial, and also intellectual magic. And they also kind of outline the different elements. They have aspects of astrology in there. They have Kabbalah. They have numbers, gematria, and different ways of doing conjurations and evocations, etc. And Agrippa mentions Oriphiel as being an intelligence with dominion over the planet Saturn. And Agrippa initially discusses the main planetary 7 angels as being Zafkiel for Saturn, Jupiter would be Zadkiel, Mars would be Camael, Sun is Raphael, Venus is Hanael, Mercury is Michael, and Moon is Gabriel. And he describes them as follows, and I quote, "These are those 7 spirits which always stand before the face of God, to whom is entrusted the disposing of the whole celestial and terrestrial kingdoms which is under the moon. For these, as say the more curious theologians, govern all things by a certain vicissitude of hours, days, and years. As the astrologers teach concerning the planets, which they are set over, which therefore Mercurius Trismegistus calls the 7 governors of the world, who by the heavens, as by instruments, distribute the influences of all stars and signs upon these inferiors. Now there are some that do ascribe them to the stars, by names somewhat differing, saying that over Saturn is an intelligence called Oriphiel, over Jupiter Zachariel, over Mars Zamael, over the Sun Michael, over Venus Anael, over Mercury Raphael, over the Moon Gabriel. And every one of these governs the world 354 years and 4 months, and the government begins from the intelligence of Saturn afterwards in order. So what he's talking about there is how essentially these different angelic beings essentially rule over the world for different periods, and once one cycle is over, then it moves into the next one. So obviously Saturn is the first one, so he's saying that Oriphiel obviously ruled the earth right at the beginning of its birth, and then it would go on from there. Eliphas Levi, who was a French magician, poet, author of more than 20 books, wrote a lot of books about magic, Kabbalah, alchemy, and is also considered one of the greatest occultists of the 19th century. He also talks about Oriphiel in his book Dogma and Ritual of High Magic, which was his first kind of published treatise on ritual magic, published in 1856. And in the book, Eliphas Levi describes Oriphiel as being the angel of the wilderness, which I think is a nice title, as it really kind of evokes this feeling of Saturn, the aloneness, the sadness, and the sort of seriousness of this planet of restriction. But that title also is believed to come from the story in Genesis, where there's an angel that appears to Agar in the wilderness. And Eliphas Levi, I just wanted to quote from him. He says the following: in the Kabbalah of the Hebrews, the sun represents the angel of light, the moon, the angel of aspirations and dreams, Mars, the destroying angel, Venus, the angel of loves, Mercury, the angel of progress, Jupiter, the angel of power, Saturn, the angel of the wilderness. They were named also Michael, Gabriel, Samael, Anael, Raphael, Zachariel, and Oriphiel. So he kind of goes along with a similar pattern to what Agrippa talks about. A. Waite, who was an occultist around the 1857 to 1942. He was an American-born British poet, mystic, magician, also a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and also famously is one of the creators of the Rider-Waite tarot deck, which is one of the most common tarot decks you probably see out there. And he also, Waite also mentions Oriphiel in his book of ceremonial magic as being a kind of like an assistant of the angel Anael. And he says the following: the ruler of the second hour is Anael, who has under his control 10 chiefs and 100 lesser lords. These in their turn command serving spirits. The chiefs include Monarchus Archiel Chadiel. The subterns include Orphiel, Cassiel, Elmomin, Quasiel, Mosiel, and Graniel. Oriphiel also appears in Paracelsus' doctrine of talismans, and the name is actually engraved on the reverse of the talisman of Saturn in the alphabet of the Magi, which is kind of like an alphabet that looks a bit like stars shapes. It's a very interesting alphabet. But on that particular talisman, you've got like a bull's head, obviously a symbol of Earth, Taurus, this kind of earthy Saturnian forces, and then there's also a 6-pointed star around it, so with the name of the archangel engraved around it. Oriphiel was also mentioned in the Golden Legend by Longfellow as being the archangel governing Saturn. Another quite important reference about Oriphiel is in a famous text called De Septum Secundeus, And this is a text that was written in 1508 by a person called Abbot Trithemius. And he was actually the teacher of Cornelius Agrippa, who we mentioned earlier. And he wrote a book called De Septem Secundaeus, which was basically like an astrological history of the world. Just to give you a bit of background on who Trithemius was. So he lived from 1462 to 1516, was born Johann Heidenberg, and he was basically a German Benedictine monk who became an abbot and then was also a polymath. So he's very active in the German Renaissance as a cryptographer, as a lexicographer, chronicler, historian, but also interestingly an occultist as well, despite the fact that he was also a Benedictine abbot, which is very interesting. And he's had a lot of influences on the development of early and I'd guess say modern occultism, and particularly in recent years he's had a really big revival in terms of interest in his works. And as I said, he was the teacher of Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa and also Paracelsus, so really very good kind of lineage there. In this book, De Septem Secundaeus, Trithemius uses the planetary periods to sort of delineate the history of the world from its beginning, which he sets at March 15,505 BC. And he uses this system that we talked about from Agrippa. So it's Saturn, Venus, Jupiter, Mercury, Mars, Moon, Sun, which is weirdly like the reverse sequence of the planetary days of the week. Trithemius lists the angels ruling each planetary period as Saturn is Oriphiel, Venus is Haniel or Aniel, Jupiter is Zachariel, Mercury is Raphael, Moon is Gabriel, and the Sun is Michael. So obviously he's switching that around. Obviously with the Golden Dawn you see Michael in Tiferet and Raphael in Hod, and he's kind of going back to an alternative to that. In the book, Trithemius discusses how each archangel basically governs a particular history over mankind, and when one passes then another one picks it up, and he assigns 2 periods to the Archangel Oriphiel, and I quote, "The first angel or spirit of Saturn is called Oriphiel, to whom God committed the government of the world from the beginning of its creation." So it's quite interesting that this is very much this idea of Oriphiel was there right from the beginning, particularly when you have this concept of the darkness of Saturn and then the beginnings of form. It really fits in with his kind of genre. There's an interesting blog I found about this by an author called Asterion, and the blog is called Occult Studies. I'll put the link in the notes. But he's written a really interesting piece about this, which is worth checking out if you haven't. And I just wanted to quote from his particular article, because it's worth reading if you're interested. Because he talks about Oriphiel and this kind of time rulership piece. "The first rule of the angel of Saturn begins at Genesis, which is believed to have begun on March the 15th, the first year of the world, and lasts for 354 years and 4 months. During this government, people were savage, dwelling in deserted and unpopular places like the beasts. Oriphiel governs the beginnings of any kind, remote periods in the history of mankind, and even history itself. He is a master of time and an angel who holds the secrets of the destinies of all beings. He is the patron of the origins, of self-karma and the genealogical karma, the one who knows in detail the beginnings of things and their purpose. The second reign began on the 26th of June in the year 2480 since the creation of the world, and ended in 2834. According to Trithemius's vision, at that time the earth began to be divided among nations, and various kingdoms were established. Here is the construction of the Tower of Babel and the confusion of languages. And people begin to scatter on the face of the earth. Humankind begins to build up the earth, to sow, to plant vineyards and trees. In a word, there is a sedentarization of human tribes and a huge agricultural progress. Agriculture has, since ancient times been under the sign of Saturn, which has the symbol of sickle and axe. So it was normal for the Saturnian angel to govern this period. And that's a quote from a blog called Occult Study, from an article written by Asterion. So here we can see, obviously, from this idea that Oriphiel is very much this kind of father of countries, father of nations of people, but also this very strong, agricultural drive, and very much close to these sort of father gods. So you get like Zeus or Kronos in ancient Greece. And in terms of, obviously, so Oriphiel's meant to be the archangel that rules the first area of the world. Then he's followed by Zachariel, who's Jupiter, and then it kind of follows on from there. So you have this very much this kind of idea of the father and then the son, who is Jupiter. So very interesting. Worth checking that book out by Trithemius if people want to find out more about that and that kind of astrological progression from that point of view. So how do we work with Oriphiel? Obviously, he's this angel of Saturn. He's the angel of the wilderness. So, he is an angel that we would, if you want to work with the Saturn forces in terms of, finding that inner strength, finding the strength to go through things alone as well, and also that sort of backbone. Saturn is all about restriction, but it's also about hard work and focus and kind of long-term planning and goal setting. So it's not things that are new. It's not things that are quick. It's something that could happen in a few years. And you need that Saturnian power to kind of keep you going and ensure that you kind of have that strength and that willpower to carry on, even when it feels completely pointless and completely hopeless. So if you wanted to work with Oriphiel, that would be a very good way of doing it if you want to work with him from the point of view of that Saturn aspect. And you could also work with him in conjunction with Zaphkiel, obviously both being archangels of the sphere of Bina. So I hope that's all you've all enjoyed that. That's all we've got time for tonight. Thanks very much for joining us this week on the Occult London podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please make sure to visit our website at occultlondon.co.uk, where you can subscribe to the show. And I'll look forward to speaking to you all soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.